welcome back. Just wanted to jump on to have a quick talk through something that I was talking about earlier today, which is why your innovation funnel looks like it's full of successful pilots, but then nothing ever seems to scale. And the reason I wanted to talk about it is although most of my clients are businesses themselves that are trying to implement and use this technology, the second most common inquiry that I get, that I've always got, is from technology scale ups. And those technology scale ups are asking me, we've done a really successful pilot with another organization and it's been a great success and everybody loved the output, but now they don't seem to want to take it to the next level and they don't seem to want to scale or option and we don't know what to do. It seems like it's stuck in some sort of internal politics and we don't understand because it's been a great success, right? And it's really, really, really common, but I guess a really expensive issue for everybody involved. And my number one reason for it is that you have done the pilot that the business would allow you to do rather than the pilot that tests the key assumptions that enable you to scale up this opportunity. So I think there's this myth that people think that they're piloting to prove whether or not the technology works. And in the majority of cases, that is simply not the case. The technology does work. In fact, oftentimes you're working with a scale up that's done this in other organizations similar to your own. So you're not really testing whether the technology works, although occasionally that might be the case. What you're actually doing, if these are business projects, is you're understanding or you're getting proof of the value and the potential of this to deliver benefits to your business, or you're proving what needs to be true to make this work in your specific business as opposed to anyone else's, or you're trying to understand that kind of cost versus effort equation. So the number one issue is that you have picked, or the business has negotiated with you to pick a pilot that is somewhere like over here in a corner of the business that no one cares about because they want to let you do that because if you break something, it's in a bit of business that doesn't really matter, that no one cares about it. Here's your challenge though. When it's a great success, unfortunately, it's in the corner in this part of the business that no one cares about. And so it doesn't really teach you anything about the things that need to be true to scale it because you've had a great success somewhere around something that no one cares about. Okay. And we'll call that a minimum viable project. So everyone talks about a minimum viable product, but this is the minimum project that the business would allow you to do. And unfortunately, you have a successful pilot that no one cares about that you then really struggle to do something with, right? So, like I said, the tech normally works. Uh, So, how might this manifest, right? You've done a pilot somewhere, it's on a tiny data set. Teams have spent a lot of time, or the vendors spent a lot of time getting a clean and consistent data set to run this pilot on, but you've learnt nothing about the effort that's going to be required to do that at scale across the business, which seems like such a massive obstacle and might prevent you taking it forward. So, one of your assumptions might be that this will work on your messy data. Have you tested that? Another thing is, have you proved whether or not customers care? Or have you done it in an area of the business that has a customer profile that's not really like all those other customers? So have you really learned whether customers care or not? And alongside this, you really need some careful thought about how many data points you need, how many data points you need to prove your business case. Okay. And what often happens is that your pilot is too small. Like maybe it's on one site, or maybe it's on a couple of sites, or maybe you've got one truck doing, I don't know, whatever. But after 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, you only have a handful of data points. And actually, what you needed to prove that business case was a sample size that had maybe 1,000 data points in it. And so you just let this thing run on a single site, but then that takes you 2 years. 2 years to get enough data to know whether or not it was a good idea. So much for that fail fast, move quickly, break things, right? So it's really important upfront to think about how much data do we need to gather to prove that this is a good idea or not? And have we designed our pilot to gather sufficient data? And sometimes you can gather that data a different way that doesn't actually require you deploying any technology anyway. I think the last thing I see is when the project team does not have enough domain knowledge to understand the obstacles to deploying a piece of technology, or they don't understand actually what the real detailed process is in real life. So then you get a successful pilot, but it's not really solving the true problem. It just becomes an add on and an extra thing that sits alongside. Examples of this are sometimes when there are digital products introduced onto the front line purely because management wants to see MI and data, but nothing is digitalized about the data collection. So then you're taking a supervisor of a gang doing construction away from supervising that construction to sitting in the cab of a van, filling out stuff on an iPad to provide the data that management wants to see whether or not they're being productive. So, are you close enough to the problem to know that this is the answer to the problem, or is this an answer to an HQ problem, not a real productivity question? So, all of this to say that choosing a pilot and designing a pilot is really, really important. And it's important to know what you need to prove to scale this up, whether that's proof of business case or customer demand or technical feasibility, whether that's the ambition, does it open up new revenue streams, or do you need sufficient information to manage the politics, to make sure those stakeholders support scaling this up, that they understand the obstacles are in place. So yeah, choice of pilot, super, super important. And it's one of the most common things people come to me with, which is successful pilot, can't scale it. Why is that? Answer, you've done the wrong pilot. I hope this helps. Sign up for my newsletter if you want to see more pieces like this straight into your inbox. I'll put the link below, but it's also on my featured session. See you in the next one.